we're talking today about giving freely of ourselves and what that means, what that looks like, and how we all gain. And I'll tell you why that has become such a focus of mine. I mean, it's really out of necessity, I think. We all have issues that we're working through. We all have challenges. And if you're on social media at all, if you watch the news at all, you know that a lot of people feel challenged today. And there's some good progress going on too, but we'd like solutions when it comes to some of the big stuff like our health, and I mean both mental health, that's been really something in the news quite a bit lately, and physical well-being, but relationships, our professional lives, feeling like we have the resources that we need to help other people, feeling a sense of purpose, all of that, and we'd like solutions to that, particularly when what we've tried hasn't been as effective as we'd like. I also think that sometimes a problem can seem so pervasive, and I'm thinking like a pandemic or crime, or bipartisan politics or war or something like that, that we wonder if our prayer can have an impact. And I think the tendency in moments like that, when you're kind of questioning if you can really be of any use, the tendency is to pull back a little bit and just, try and stay under the radar, keep a low profile and see if somebody else does something, that type of thing. But there are solutions. I mean, there are good universal solutions, and we can be part of them. I'm here to share that message. We can be part of them. It just takes a more spiritual element in our thinking and outlook. So I want to talk today about a way forward, maybe an unexpected way forward that brings solutions. The ideas in Christian Science, that's really what we're talking about today, including this approach of giving freely of ourselves, have transformed my life. I know that's easy to say, that's kind of a broad brushstroke statement, but they really have. I mean, they've enabled me to be more of a player. I mean that in a good way. They've enabled me to step up a little bit more and be part of the solution. And as a result, they've impacted the lives of people around me. I mean, a lot of times without their even realizing where the blessing is coming from. Giving freely of ourselves touches the world. And if you're thinking, wow, okay, that sounds big. I wasn't really looking for a whole new experience. I was just kind of coming for healing and comfort. That's great. That's great. You've come to the right place. I mean, this approach that I'm talking about is the basis for healing and comfort. Reliable basis. So let me jump into a story here that kind of illustrates what we're talking about. And this is an example of a guy who kind of reluctantly at first found it within himself to give more of himself. And he probably wouldn't have used that language at the time. He didn't even realize that's what he was doing. But that enabled this larger blessing, and including for himself, unexpected blessing. So the person that I'm talking about is, he was a high school senior and had struggled for several days with sore teeth and a swollen jaw, swollen mouth. His wisdom teeth were coming in, but not in a comfortable way. In fact, he couldn't even eat properly. He was getting by on smoothies and shakes and stuff like that, and stoicism, because he didn't want help from anybody, especially his parents. I mean, he was going to get through this himself. Now, I think he felt kind of unsettled, though, to be honest, because his mouth had never looked like that before. He'd heard some stories from friends about extractions and that type of thing. I mean, how long was his mouth going to look like this, He had some experience in turning to prayer and finding healing, some good experience in that. His parents were Christian Scientists. And so there was space for that in their home. I mean, that's what they often did. There was an expectation of healing. And so one evening when the pain was pretty difficult, he went up to his room to think about how he wanted to go forward. And he could hear the whole family downstairs happily making dinner together. And he thought, okay, no more tough guy. I need help. I want help. And so he called a practitioner of Christian Science. And let me just back up and say that that's somebody whose full-time job is taking prayer requests and then responding with Christian Science treatment and with healing. And the prayer aspect of Christian Science treatment doesn't require any physical contact. It's not laying of hands or manipulation or anything like that. It's listening to God. That's really what it is. It's praying in a way that awakens our thought more to the good that's here, God's good creation, God's good reality that's here right now. And that's a different type of thinking. That stirs something new in your thought. And that mental activity, well, I find that it changes my goals, it changes my paradigm, it changes your perspective, and that changes your experience. It harmonizes your experience. That was just what this kid was looking for. So he explained the symptoms to this Christian Science practitioner that he called and asked her if she'd pray for him, and she agreed. So then the two of them chatted on the phone for a little bit after that. And it came out in their conversation that he was in the throes of buying a new motorcycle. He was really excited about the bike he picked out. Proud of the model and excited about this new chapter of freedom and independence and manhood. His parents were not so excited. They were concerned about his safety, frankly, and so he relayed all that, and the practitioner just said something really simple back, just a question. She said, okay, is getting the motorcycle right now worth a conflict with your parents? And that kind of made him think, not get the motorcycle as soon as possible. That was a new thought to him. But, I think something had happened already, something in their conversation, maybe something in the way that practitioner had prayed earlier in the day had paved the way for a softening of the heart for him, or like I said, it changed his outlook. Because he told me later, as he thought about it, he realized that was something he could do. He could wait a year, graduate high school, move out, and then buy the motorcycle. And he tells me that when he finally came to that conclusion, he actually felt kind of relieved. You know how that happens sometimes? So the two of them finish their conversation. He hangs up the phone and he discovers in that moment that all the symptoms are gone. The swelling that had prevented him from eating normally for like 5 days, instantly gone. The pain was gone. His teeth felt great. He went downstairs and joined his family for dinner. That was the first time in like 5 days. I'm sure it totally hit the spot for him. And then in the next several weeks, his wisdom teeth came in naturally and normally, comfortably. He still has them today in good working order. And the motorcycle came along at just the right time too. That decision that he made to do the bigger thing, or do the harder thing, maybe face some new thoughts, to give freely of himself, didn't cause him to lose anything good at all. It was just the opposite. He gained, relief and joy, a renewed relationship with his parents. I think he found more maturity in that decision that he made than he might have found in the bike, if he was looking for that. And he found unexpectedly quick physical healing. He found that unexpected way forward. I think anytime we feel stuck, like he did, and there's lots of ways to feel stuck. Maybe you just lost your job, or somebody broke up with you, or your mouth hurts, or you had an argument with your parents, or whatever. Anytime we feel kind of cornered like that, what really makes a difference, I think what the situation is demanding, really, is that humility that he showed. Or even sacrifice. Bear with me on the word sacrifice, because I know that word's not always popular. But I've been finding lately, it gives you a place to go mentally when you think about that. Sacrifice can be oddly rewarding, because it shows us that, like it showed the kid, our happiness is not as based on getting what we want right when we want it as we thought it was. Actually, our happiness flows a lot more freely than that. We're not so dependent on the thing. Our happiness comes from kind of discerning and supporting the good that's going on, letting ourselves be part of that, contributing to that. You have to discern it first, but you find that, like the kid did. It turned out that honoring his parents was actually more beneficial to him than going forward with his plan. Anytime we feel stuck, I think there's a larger context that we can find, a higher perspective that has healing solutions in it. But I can't talk about that larger context or the healing solutions in it without talking about God. And so that's where I want to start. And maybe just before that, I'll say that one of the opportunities of a Christian Science lecture, I feel like, is to take public topics that are uppermost in thought and address them systematically. I mean, that is so fruitful. That is so helpful to a community, so good for all of us. And probably if we talked about it a little bit, we could come up with maybe like the top 5 things that people are thinking about. I'm thinking, Israel, Hamas, or Russia, Ukraine, or things like gender and identity issues, or people's feelings of isolation, or mental health. I mean, those types of things that are really up in thought. And one way I would like to respond to those is to talk about the science that undergirds giving freely of ourselves, that science. What is it that enables this generosity of spirit? I want to talk about that science and its discoverer. And I think when we look at that science that operates in our lives, then if you sit down to pray about, if we all prayed right now about, let's say, Israel, Hamas, if we all sat down and prayed about that individually, we'd probably all have different inspirations about it, maybe even different pictured outcomes, at least when we started. But as you learn about this science, Christian science, that operates in our lives, you start going from trying to make something happen in your prayers to witnessing what God is doing. And there's something really powerful in that. And so I think one of the ways that I'm going to respond to these public topics that we're all thinking about is to show the utility of the science that is operating in our lives. That enables our prayers to be, I would say, infinitely more effective. We go from trying to make something happen to observing more of what God is doing. There's a great statement in the textbook of Christian Science, based on the Bible, the textbook of Christian Science, where the author, Mary Baker Eddy, says, we must look deep into realism instead of accepting only the outward sense of things. And so I hope over the next 45 minutes or so, we can kind of look deep into realism and see more of the potential of God, the potential of good in responding to the things that the world is concerned about right now. I like thinking about the impact that our time together can have on the community and on the world. So I'm going to start with God and God's nature and us and our nature. And then I'll talk about Jesus, I think probably the best example we have of somebody giving freely of himself. And then prayer, it's a catalyst for good, we saw that. And the science and its discoverer, and then we'll talk about an example or two if we have time. So I find that as a Christian Science practitioner myself, but also just as a mom, maybe as much as a mom as anything, as a citizen in the world, it's really important that I get a deeper sense, a deeper understanding of God practically every day. That's what I hope to do. And so I find it's really helpful to not relegate God, and it seems like I have to fight this tendency sometimes, not relegate God to the role of superhuman, that makes kind of arbitrary decisions in our lives, that blesses some people but not others, or that feels kind of distant. If I feel myself doing that, what is such a good antidote is the Bible, particularly the New Testament, because it talks about God as infinite love. I mean, it says that God is love. So not this superhuman. Ooh, that was better, wasn't it? Not a superhuman, but a presence. Not something that condemns or judges or withholds or that type of thing, but something that blesses, and it is there to help and heal. I mean, it says God is a very present help in trouble. So I like thinking of God as infinite love. We can think of God as infinite mind, the source of the inspiration that I'm talking about today, or spirit, divine spirit that animates us and that creates the universe, that works on everyone's behalf. And I think that when you do that, when you start thinking of God that way, as love or spirit, as a presence, you start realizing, okay, this is it. This is what animates the universe. This is the one cause. It's God as love or as infinite mind that impels us to discover within ourselves the things that we really need. Like the kid did. Like health even. Like health, clarity, harmony, unity, supply, joy. We discover that within when impelled by spirit. So that's a little something of God's infinite loving nature. And I think when you hear that, you can't help but think, okay, so then what about us and our nature? I think that's something that humanity has talked about for a long time, thought about. They talk about it in the Bible, too. In the Hebrew scriptures, we're referred to in terms of God. It says in Psalms, it is God that hath made us, not we ourselves. We are God's people. I love that. We are people of divine love. That sounds good. I want to be part of that. We're people of infinite mind. That gives you something really substantial to think about, I think. And you probably already have. You've probably wondered, thought about if your core identity isn't so much more than what's seen on the surface. And I think that's kind of intuitive. I feel like we all kind of know that we're so much more than something physical that eats and breathes and tries not to get sick. I feel like that was kind of the unintended messaging that would sometimes come during COVID and lockdown and stuff. We felt smaller, or that message, at least I felt like, was kind of tapping at the door. But we know that we're more than that. We're something more than something physical that's trying to not get sick, if we're God's people, then we're like God. Just like works of art are like the artist that made them. I love this analogy. Works of art show the essence and the ideas and the nature of the artist, and we show the nature of God. We're inherently wise and good and helpful and capable. We're inherently able to love our neighbor even when it's difficult, without limitation. And I love that sense. That's really who we are, just representatives of God. And furthermore, if God is spirit, and God made everything, that means, and we're like God, that means we're spiritual. And I know that, again, is a really broad brushstroke statement. We could spend the rest of the day talking about what it means to be spiritual. That would be fun. There are a lot of good corollaries to that statement. But it really means there's nothing limited or incomplete built into us. We are capable of expressing all the qualities of God without interruption. And that's not, not just the people in this room. That's the reality of the universe. Qualities of God being expressed without interruption. And prayer shows us that good reality. That's why I wanted to talk about prayer. I talked earlier about, how this kid found some really nice healing and, this unexpected way forward when he turned to prayer. What was going on there? Or how can we do that? I'd like something like that to happen every day in my life. How can we see more of that type of thing for ourselves and for everybody around us? Of course, there are a lot of ways to pray. Certainly as many as there are people here. But I think one element that's common to any sincere prayer is just this deep desire. We have this deep desire to be more aware of God's presence in our lives. Or, not just mentally to be more aware, but to feel it. That's what we want. To feel welcomed by divine love or enlightened by infinite mind. I think Kathy mentioned I was a math professor before I started practicing Christian Science full time, and I didn't realize this, but apparently something like 98% of, you can check me on this, I don't quite know the number, but some really unusually high percentage of math PhDs in academia are agnostic or atheist. I wasn't, but I was the minority in my department. But I found that we could actually have really great conversations when I used words like, well, infinite mind. I mean, we were all trying to push the field forward. We were all trying to discover new mathematical theorems and stuff that we trusted was out there. And when I would talk about God as infinite mind, they liked that. So I think we all like the idea of feeling enlightened by infinite mind. And I think there's something kind of universal and appealing to that. That type of prayer, I mean, when you feel that connection, when you feel impelled by not what you want to do, but when you feel impelled by infinite spirit, for example, that's transformational. And I find that it can't help but remind us of our own spiritual nature. And I find in moments like that, like I was saying earlier, my goals change. And maybe whatever pushed me to pray in the first place, I mean, some concern I had or some desire or worry or fear or something like that, whatever it was. And that's okay. That's okay to pray in response to stuff like that. But I find that once you get into this kind of transformational prayer, those things can kind of take a back seat to the larger ideas that are coming from God. Yeah, that truly transformational prayer like that starts with God and ideas about God's nature, really simple ideas about God and God's nature and us and our nature. I mean, you're thinking big here. And then our agreeing with those ideas. That's key. And then the higher outlook you get, it's almost a relief. Like, that's why I think that kid said he felt relieved in the beginning. I mean, you kind of go to a bigger way of thinking, a righter way of thinking, seeing more of the possibilities. And then the higher perspective that you get, it's not something you're trying to make happen. It's reality. You've discovered more reality. And then you get to experience it. You all could probably think of an example along these lines, but I might, like in prayer, I might become more aware that as an expression of God, I am inherently joyful and purposeful. I mean, that's just part of who I am as an expression of God. Ideas like that land really well, even if you're not feeling joyful and purposeful in the moment. When they come from infinite mind like that, they have the ring of truth, and you experience it. I mean, I might, after just kind of enjoying that spiritual idea, that spiritual fact for an afternoon, I might then the next day wake up like a half hour earlier than usual, not even meaning to, and get everything done joyfully and purposefully, more than I thought was possible that day. I mean, that's the type of just gentle outcome that we can expect when we pray. But prayer isn't about changing things. It's about discovering within ourselves what it is that God's doing and magnifying that and letting that lead us forward to do something good and big in the world, or at least in our corner of the world. And I know that sounds good, sounds big. It is good. I have to admit that, well, let me start by saying, let's talk about somebody who always lived in that larger consciousness. Prayer shows us that higher perspective with the healing solutions in it. Let's talk about somebody who is always aware of that. I mean, we all live there. That's God's good reality. But somebody who saw things like humility and moral courage and good works as just a way of living, a way of bringing forward everybody and everything, not just himself. And you probably know I'm talking about Jesus. I think even just because of his healing works, feeding huge groups of people with a small amount of food, that would be really useful today. And calming storms, that's what we're looking for that too, all kinds of storms. Healing disease was considered incurable. Even from just his healing works, Jesus stands out as probably the best example we have of somebody giving freely of himself. And that's why I want to talk about him. Everything he did pointed to the abundance of divine love. His words and works show us the value, and I think that probably the unexpected reward, too, of giving of ourselves. He showed us that we can do that even when it seems difficult. There's always something tangible we can do. I talked earlier about how sometimes if we feel stuck, we feel like, well, that's what stuck means, I think. We feel like there's not much we can do. We're going to wait for somebody else to do something or see if our circumstances change. But Jesus showed us that even when you're in a situation like that, or maybe especially when you're in a situation like that, the ball is in your court so much more than you realize. There's always something tangible we can do. And it really has to do with love. And when I say love, I know that word is used a lot. I mean the kind of love that steps up to the plate. The love that sees what needs to be done, or that rises to the occasion. That really active love. There's this, well, I would say Jesus saw everything in terms of God and God's creation, what God created. Or he saw everything in terms of divine love and what divine love was enabling in that moment. And because of that, he was always learning more about the healing power of divine love, and he wanted everybody to experience that as much as possible. From his followers to us today. And so there's this great scene in the Bible when Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he tells them that if they can love one another like he did, even when it's difficult, they will find reliable joy. And I'm sure there were times that it was difficult, to be a disciple. I think that might have been intense sometimes. But if they could get beyond themselves and love one another and help and support one another, they'd find this reliable source of joy. And that's so germane to what we're talking about today. Our joy comes from discerning the good that's going on and contributing to that. There's so many ways to do that. We're not all going to wait a year and then buy a motorcycle. That was the right way forward for this one kid. But you can just imagine how many ways there are to give freely of ourselves. I think for a lot of us, it often has to do with work. I'm just going to give some examples here. But like maybe there's some little task at work that seems kind of daunting to you. Maybe your boss thinks it's great for you to do, but you're kind of afraid of it. Sometimes giving freely of ourselves is accepting it. Accepting the challenge and seeing the good that flows from that. Seeing ourselves, witnessing ourselves. I talk about prayer as witnessing ourselves rise to the occasion, letting God work through us that way, and giving. Another great way to give of ourselves is forgiveness. Maybe there's somebody in your past that you feel like has been hurtful and kind of got away with it, and you've kind of written them off, or you don't think about them very often. Giving of ourselves often is remembering them and forgiving them and finding our way forward there. It often feels like they have the power. They were kind of a jerk and then went on their way, and they probably don't even realize how much they hurt us or something like that. It can often feel like that way, and it feels like we don't have much leverage. But I'm discovering that a lot of times when you forgive somebody, you're like the only person in the world that can give to them just in that way. And, we know what a blessing that is to ourselves, too. It takes that generosity of spirit. I think forgiveness is a way forward, an unexpected way forward for a lot of us, because I got to share these ideas about a year ago with a bunch of orphaned girls, at an orphanage in South Africa. And, they ranged in age from maybe like 6 to 18 or something like that. They knew right what I was talking about when I talked about forgiveness and the relief that it can bring and the way forward, the unexpected way forward it is. And then like a month ago, I was talking to a bunch of male inmates in LA They knew right what I was talking about. So I think these are some of those universal ways that we have that touch something in all of us. Giving of ourselves might be something as simple as just sharing some spiritual ideas with somebody, maybe a coworker or a neighbor or something you don't usually talk to about God. Just having that confidence to speak a little bit more. Also, giving of ourselves could be speaking less and letting somebody else's light shine a little bit more. Or even, it can be helping somebody else to talk less. Sometimes that's not easy to do, but I'm thinking business meeting or dinner with my kids. Both of those come to thought. And it can be ways to honestly, when that idea comes to mind, you feel a little self-conscious, and is there really something I can say here that's going to help? But it does open up something good. You all can, it really has to do with just intentionally looking for ways to bless humanity or the world. All those ways that I just talked about, giving of ourselves, come from divine love. And so they bring joy, not just to the people that receive, but they bring joy to the giver. And I think that's really my key message today, that our, when we give of ourselves, we're not trying to get something from our neighbor or the world or that type of thing. Transactional giving, we've heard that phrase lately. Transactional giving doesn't result in unexpected healing. You're just kind of doing what the world thought you were going to do. And it's probably fine, but it doesn't disrupt the old limited ways of thinking. You're not looking deep into realism. You're just kind of accepting the outward sense of things and responding to that. But when we give freely of ourselves, that is when things are really interesting. It's not that we get something as much as we discover what it is that we already have. We discover the good, the health, the abundance of divine love and how it's blessing us already. And I don't mean that there's not a substantial, tangible outcome, because there is. You discover that larger context with the healing solutions in it. That kid, when he said, okay, yeah, I'm going to honor my parents here and do the right thing, he wasn't thinking, and that'll make my teeth feel better. That was just the lovely, natural outcome of that. It's not that we get something as much as we discover that larger context with the healing solutions in it. Who wouldn't want that? And that's why I call it an unexpected way forward. If you feel stuck, your teeth hurt, or your legs don't work like they used to, or you're mad at your spouse, or whatever, you need a new job, anything like that, and you Google an answer, like, what should I do? To any one of those. It's very rare that the internet was going to say something like, have you thought of giving more of yourself, or sacrifice, But that's why I call it that unexpected way forward. And I think it's that type of thinking that enables something new and good in us to come forward. I know that sounds really good. It is good, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say that sometimes that effort of giving freely of ourselves, I should say, when you find that larger context with the healing solutions in it, anything that's unlike God, anything, like any limitation or an argument or anything like that, anything that has seemed difficult loses its grip, because it's just not part of this larger space that we're inhabiting. And I think it's my sense that Jesus understood that and preached that. I think that's what Jesus was talking about when he said, I am come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. That's the abundant living he's talking about. When you discover the power that you have to give freely of yourself, that is wealth. It's exciting. I think it probably goes without saying, abundant living isn't accumulating stuff. It's finding what God is doing within us. Again, and magnifying that, and letting that impel us forward to do something good and big in the world. As I said, I know that sounds good to all of us. And it takes all different forms, all different good forms. But it can start with a few tough moments. Not because what we're giving up is all that, or not because what we're taking on, a new assignment or something like that is too hard for us. I mean, neither of those is true. That's not why it can be tough. But it can be tough because we need to give up an old view, of ourselves or our neighbor or the world that has somehow come to seem important to us. But those outgrown views or those old views only seem rock solid until you test them a little bit and discover that they're not. I mean, they're just not. And then that frees us up to be moved by and experience the good that just makes our hearts sing, the unexpected good. And I think when that happens, you feel impelled forward. You feel surprisingly, unexpectedly impelled forward. And you feel part of something bigger than yourself. And that tangible presence of God in our lives there is the same influence for good that Jesus expressed. I mean, it's that God working on our behalf. Yeah, that unexpected presence of God working on everyone's behalf. And that presence has a really special name in the Bible. It's Christ. That's the healing, loving activity of God working on everyone's behalf. And that presence, that proof of God just filled Jesus' thought and experience. And he was known by the title Christ because of the way he constantly proved that presence of God with us. It's timeless, though. You see evidence of it in the Hebrew Scriptures, certainly. In Christ Jesus' healing ministry, definitely you see Christ in that. And in the Acts of the Apostles, but today, too, in 2024. I think when we get tangible inspiration about a legitimate way to slow climate change, for example, or tamp down carbon emissions, or feed people that have struggled with hunger for years, or help people find, accessible, clean drinking water. When inspiration comes that benefits everybody that way, that's Christ. That's Christ operating in our lives. And it's timeless. In fact, it says in the New Testament, we continue to share in all that Christ has for us. So someone who showed that we continue to share in all Christ has for us in a really tangible way was Mary Baker Eddy. And she's the discoverer of the science that I'm talking about today that undergirds this, remarkable opportunity we have to give freely of ourselves, remarkable ability we have. She was a spiritual seeker, eventually a religious reformer. She was born in 1821 to a New England family, to parents who loved the Bible. A very devoted Christian family. Her parents loved and quoted and read that Bible to their kids. And so Mary and her 5 siblings just grew up in this atmosphere of spiritual discovery and Bible reading and church going and Christ. And in all of that, this is in her childhood and in her youth, she discovered something of the healing power of God-centered living. That might sound pretty intuitive to us today. But for her to consciously, intentionally link living in a way that puts God first with physical health and well-being was cutting edge in the 1800s. And then as an adult, her prayers, which had been deepening over the decades, her deep faith in God remarkably lifted her out of decades of ill health and some acute injuries that were thought to be life-threatening. That had a huge impact on her, of course. I'm kind of collapsing events in her life, but it was a very impactful time. And it was during that period that she discovered what she referred to as Christian Science. And that is an explanation of God's nature. We've scratched the surface of it, but a much more thorough explanation of God's nature and of our nature as expressions of God. Christian Science, I have found, brings a fuller experience of God in my life. It shows us our unbreakable relationship to divine love and brings an experience that necessarily includes healing. It includes the tangible outcome healing for ourselves and for others. Well, when Mary Baker Eddy discovered Christian Science, she discovered that it enabled her to heal herself and others of all kinds of chronic and acute disease. And her first thought was to make this science as available as possible. So she went to local Christian churches and talked to their ministers and pastors about this, timeless Christian healing principle that she'd found, that she was sharing, totally expecting that they would start preaching it from their pulpits. And when that didn't happen, she realized, okay, I'm going to have to put this in a book. If I want to get it out there for the common person in the public, I'm going to write it. I need to write it in a book. And so she did. I mentioned in her textbook, her Bible-based textbook, Science and Health, with Key to the Scriptures. I'm so grateful she did that. I'm so grateful that she not only wrestled through the ideas and made them her own and discovered this healing method that Christ Jesus had been practicing centuries earlier, but also that she worked with the language enough to articulate it in a way that would last. It's been very transformative for me. So, when Mary Baker Eddy discovered this science, then her life was transformed, and she just found herself on fire, healing left and right, healing people of all kinds of chronic and acute disease. And so, as you can imagine, this is happening in a small New England town. Demand for her book, which teaches how to heal, skyrocketed. An interest in her reputation as a healer grew quite a bit too. And so as a result, many people have written biographies of Mary Baker Eddy, and there's an anecdote in one of them that I want to share here, and it's just a really nice example of, again, somebody who found it within himself to give freely and how it benefited his community and his family and even himself for years to come. So Mary Baker Eddy discovers Christian Science in 1865, and from that point on is just given over to healing. To getting the message out. She leads with healing. I think there was something pretty smart to that. Wouldn't you rather be healed than listen to a sermon? I think our favorite sermon is being healed. So she definitely led with that. She also did teach and preach and travel and write and publish her book, Science and Health, based on the Bible. Then by the 1900, at the turn of the century, her life was pretty focused on teaching and publishing her book. By that time, most of the healing work was done by her students, this rising generation of healers. But there was a sea captain nearby, he was a local man, who had just returned from, he was also in New England, he had just returned from a long voyage at sea to find his invalid wife in worse shape than when he left. He was already concerned for her when he left, and when he came back, things were worse. And so I think he was afraid for her life, frankly. Captain Eastman, Joseph Eastman, had just heard of Mary Baker Eddy, this local woman who was practicing this revived Christian healing and, taking prayer requests and healing people in real time and quite a bit. And so he decided to go to her house and see if she could help. So, he knocked on the door. When she answered, he explained the situation, and he asked her if she could heal his wife. And to his amazement, Mary Baker Eddy said to him, this is what she said, with just this heart full of love and affection. She said, "Captain Eastman, why don't you heal your wife yourself?" He was not expecting that, as you can imagine. He had just heard of Mary Baker Eddy. He had just heard of Christian Science. But I think she saw something in him. I think she recognized that if Captain Eastman were willing to be involved in the healing, that was going to do more for his community, his family, the healing work in general of the time, than if she took the case. Something like the difference between giving somebody a fish and teaching them to fish. She was not abandoning him by any means. She was actually about to start teaching a class on spiritual healing, Christian Science healing, and so she invited him to enroll in it, which he did, and he began praying for his wife, who improved until a complete recovery took place. And Mrs. Eastman was so delighted. After months or maybe years of suffering, she was so delighted and renovated and renewed and grateful that she then took a class with Mary Baker Eddy, a course on spiritual healing. And in time, both Captain Eastman and Mrs. Eastman became public practitioners of Christian Science. And so what had started as, this dear husband who was afraid for his wife's well-being and this invalid wife turned into this strong couple that helped and healed in their community for decades. I think that Mrs. Eastman found healing when Captain Eastman realized that there was this impersonal, timeless, scientific method that he and anybody could turn to. I think that moment must have taken some moral courage for him to admit that a little bit. I'm sure it would have felt easier for somebody else to take the case, But Captain Eastman, like all of us, had something within himself that he didn't even realize was there, and by that I mean, ability to heal. He had that within himself that the world needed. And Christian Science showed him that, showed him that life was bigger and better than he realized, and he had something to contribute. And we all do. It really has to do with recognizing the impact that a person can have on the whole world or on all of humanity. Mary Baker Eddy talks about this in one of her books. There's this passage where she's speaking rhetorically, and she talks about, the bigness of the potential of our prayer, of our actions. She says, who should care for everybody? It's enough, say they, to care for a few. But the good done and the love that foresees more to do stimulate philanthropy and are an ever-present reward. And I love that. I mean, when we find our lives in the love that foresees more to do, when we step back a little bit and see more of what God is doing in us, the potential that we have to give, we find that ever-present reward. And it's really rewarding. I mean, I guess that's redundant, right? It's really joyful. I find that the joy that comes in those moments of stepping back a little bit and discovering what you have to give, that God-given potential that you didn't initially realize was there, the joy that comes in those moments just kind of eclipses any feeling of needing or wanting something ourselves. I know many of you have experienced it. You've probably all experienced this before, but I feel like my son, don't tell my son I said this, but sometimes when he can't find something, I can hear the kind of like a homework assignment that's due or something like that, and I kind of hear the panic in his voice, and I can hear him go, "Mom," and I know what's coming. He wants help finding it. Whatever I'm doing at that moment, I don't care. I mean, there's something, this is the love that foresees more to do. I mean, I want him to find it and hand it in. He's done the hard part, and I don't want that effort to go to waste. And so I find myself running downstairs and finding it. I'm not thinking about myself. I mean, and that's a very small example, but that's the love that foresees more to do. My son says, nothing's truly lost until your mom can't find it. So I love that. So, but yeah, when that stimulating philanthropy, when we find our lives in that, we find that ever-present reward. And we forget ourselves a little bit, and now we're being impelled forward just by infinite love. I mean, now it's love, infinite mind, spirit that's impelling us forward. That feels different. I think that the young kid found that to a larger degree. Captain Eastman found that. Mary Baker Eddy lived that way. I mean, her life was impelled by infinite love. She found it within herself to give to everyone. As her quote says, who should care for everybody? She made an effort to do that. Her book, Science and Health, is an outcome of a life of caring for everybody. And I'll just say, I just want to talk about it briefly, kind of as an outcome of this type of care that one person can do. The Bible and Science and Health are two separate books. Of course, the Bible is timeless guide, timeless universal guide, filled with God's word, filled with Christ Jesus healing ministry and people having profound experiences with God. And Science and Health shows the practicality of those ideas in the Bible. I mean, I find it often takes a verse or a passage or something from the Bible and unpacks it in a way that makes it so that I can use that practical spiritual wisdom in my life. And as I said, the last 100 pages of Science and Health, I think I said this, are letters that were written by people who were healed just by reading the ideas in the book. How did that happen? I mean, how did people find healing? How do people find healing? Just by reading the ideas in the book. You know, for context, when Science and Health was written, it was finding its way into the hands of spiritual seekers. And this was the 1860s. Life on the farm was tough. You know, life in the factory was tough. And when people learned just a little something of their, well, first of all, had their sense of God enlarged, I think. You know, so many of our problems stem from a too small sense of God. And when their sense of God was opened up, and when they discovered more of their own potential, they found healing on all kinds of levels. And I know that sounds good to all of us. I just want to say that, you know, what would keep us from finding that? The one thing, I have a nice example that I want to finish here with about, again, you know, the potential that giving freely of ourselves has. But I need to be completely honest and say that, you know, as I said, it can start with some tough moments. The only obstacle to that, I think, is a feeling that maybe we're inadequate to step up to the task. I mean, you might think, I like what she's talking about, but I don't have that in me, you know, or I don't know how you find that. I've seen it in others, but I don't know if I'm ready or willing or able to do some of the things that she's talking about. And I know that feeling. But I have also found that the suggestion that comes to our thought that we're not adequate is not true. And we have a means to push past that. Any type of suggestion that something besides God is impelling our lives is what the Bible refers to as the carnal mind. But the carnal mind doesn't have any power. You know, I mean, it's, again, if God is spirit and spirit is all, there's nothing apart. God created everything. There is no being apart from God, apart from good. And so when things like limitation or lack or something come to our thought, they're a suggestion from a source that doesn't have any power. The Bible calls it the carnal mind, or sometimes the accuser. I like that too, because I'm not afraid of an accuser. I know there's nothing real behind that. So let me give one more example here of the potential of giving, and fun, frankly, of giving freely of ourselves, how transformative it can be, and that we have nothing to be afraid of as we go forward doing that. So this was an experience that I had. I was in college. I was in grad school, actually. And I learned that if I was willing to identify with God-given qualities like strength and decisiveness and maturity, if I were willing to identify with those and recognize them in myself, God would bring out something really good in me, something worth giving, something worth sharing. So yeah, as I said, I was in graduate school, and I had an itchy, uncomfortable rash on my chest that would not budge. I mean, it had been there for a while. I was in grad school a long time. I was in it so long, my parents started calling it gradual school. So this had to go. Now, you know, I have to admit, the idea of giving freely of myself, you know, wasn't something that I was really thinking about. I could hide the rash with the right clothes, and it didn't hurt that much, and so I didn't really do anything about it. I think that was more a reflection of how I was living my life, though. I mean, as I said, I wasn't really thinking about the larger context with healing solutions in it, or you know, what I could contribute to the world. I mean, life felt like something that just happened to me, and I kind of navigated as best as I could. But I think I was starting to develop a relationship with God. I loved the idea of healing, In my free time, I was praying and reading the Bible on science and health. And one day I came across a line in Science and Health that was really meaningful to me. It said, inflammation, that's just what I was dealing with, inflammation is fear, an excited state of mortals that is not normal. I was surprised at how explicitly that was stated. I mean, it was practically mathematical. You know, it was like inflammation equals fear. If you're inflamed, you're probably afraid. I didn't think I was afraid, you know, but as I started thinking about it, I realized there were lots of times when I made decisions based on fear. I was in, you know, I would stay too long in unhealthy relationships because I was afraid of navigating life by myself. I was in this really challenging graduate program, not to give to the field, I don't think, but because I was afraid of not getting a good job otherwise. I'd even pack too much lunch in the morning because I was afraid of being hungry in the afternoon. And I didn't really know what to do with all these fears, but I knew that they weren't helping me. You know, I mean, they weren't, they were making me too small. You know what I mean by that? I mean, they were keeping my focus on myself. Right, just keeping my focus too small. That, you know, and that's that carnal mind mentality. I mean, there's no real intelligence to that. It's not like I took this really reasonable assessment of my life and realized, yep, it's too hard, I can't do it. You know, I mean, that wasn't true. I was not inadequate. That wasn't true. That was an accusation. Fear was making me feel inadequate. And when I realized that, it was kind of an aha moment, you know. And then I thought of a Bible verse that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I think it's from 1 John, where it says, there is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. The only perfect love I knew was God's love. And so I felt a lot of incentive to just become more aware of God's love in my life. And I did that. It was not hard. I mean, as I said, I was a grad student. I had this cute little apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and safe. It was near campus. I was grateful for that. I had friends and family nearby. I had a good job. It wasn't lucrative, but you know, it paid my education. All of these things were good, and I knew that the root of anything good was God. And so it made me really obvious. What did I say at the beginning? I was looking deep into realism, you know, instead of accepting the outward sense of things. I was seeing more of what was real and true in my life. And that gave me the incentive to just see more examples of God's love throughout my day, not just for myself, but for everybody. And that got easier and easier. And as I did that, I felt more confident. I felt like, okay, I belong here. I am part of this good creation, and I want to contribute to it. You know, and that was an empowering feeling. And so that gave me the confidence, I think, to ask myself some tough questions. Was I in these relationships to give of myself? You know, to be part of something bigger that might bless other people? Or was I just trying to feel safe in a too small life? Was I in this graduate program to give to the field, you know, maybe push the field forward in a way that would benefit other people? Or was I trying to get just the right professor's name on my resume so I'd get a good job? And as I asked myself those kinds of questions, I found myself having the confidence to answer and adjust, including what would have seemed just impossible a week or two earlier, but completely leaving these unhealthy relationships for good. I didn't leave my graduate program, but I tweaked it a little bit. I found somebody different to work with, and she and I had a really fruitful time writing my dissertation together. It ended up being a really nice success, and the research community quoted it for years afterwards. I think my eating habits even got better. I mean, everything was just, you know, being redeemed. And so I felt myself, like Captain Eastman, going from feeling like a victim to feeling like a healer. And I don't want to overstate anything, you know, I mean, it wasn't, well, it was huge. I think I'll say that, as I think about it, it was. And I noticed, I knew something was happening because I started getting prayer requests from people during this time, and it just felt like, yeah, I had something to contribute, and I wanted to be part of the good reality that was around me. So maybe a week or two after those aha moments, I was changing clothes and I discovered that my skin was completely clean and clear. Every trace of inflammation and fear was gone. I was so delighted. And that was just, that was just confirmation of the growth that I felt like I'd experienced. In this, again, it was this willingness to identify myself more with God and God's good qualities. That was the giving there. As I said, there are lots of ways to give, and they're different for each one of us, but I think it was a willingness to stop thinking of myself as so much as a kind of immature student that just didn't know what to do, but step up to the plate a little bit and see how I could be, a healer in the community. I think that was the difference. There's such healing power in this approach of giving of ourselves. It's often quiet, though. It's you and God working out something wonderful that then becomes obvious to those around us. So I just want to thank you all for sticking with me until the end. So much good, so much healing power in this. And the ideas that you have already, the ideas that you find in the Bible and in Science and Health and in your own prayers will give you everything you need to bless and to be blessed and to give freely and to gain all. Thank you for coming.